There I go, messing with my mic again.
I know, it's good though.
Okay, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm your host, Kieran Smith. Welcome back to the Godspot podcast. And today we're picking up where we left off at. We're going to be talking about the silent generation today. Right, babe?
Yep.
All right. I got my lovely wife right behind the camera, whom you will not see today.
You gonna point that out every time?
All right, yeah. So the silent generation. So I have some dates listed, and that's just the dates of the previous generations we've done so far. So we did Gen X, right?
Yeah.
They ranged, their birth years are ranging from 1965 to 1980.
Yep.
We did baby boomers. They are ranging from 1946 to 1964.
Yep.
And now we are doing the silence. The silence. That's one thing they call them. The silent generation. They are from 1925 to 1945. So I believe these are my most updated dates that I could find. And I did hunt because I don't want somebody to be like, not 1944.
But you said it in the past couple podcasts, that they update it. They can update it daily.
Yeah.
Or often.
Yeah. If not daily, often. Like I've seen the birth ranges, the birth year ranges change a couple times. Okay, so the silent generation, let's see. We talked about it. Born, now some statistics put that at, them at 1928, but some 1925. So I just went with the farthest, like the one that would cover the most of them.
Okay.
So we're going to say 1925 to 1945. So they range in age today. They would be from 75. No, I believe from age 72, because it would have been 75 if I would have stuck with 28. So age 72 to 95. That's how old they would be today. So here's a fun little interesting fact, right? The silent generation is made up of about 50 million children born between 1925 and 1945. Children from this group were plagued with war and economic instability as a result of the Great Depression during World War II. They watched America surpass its previous economic conditions and and become a global superpower. The Great Depression ranged from 1929 to 1939. We talked about that, 10 years long. And it was a result of the stock market crash in 1929.
Yeah.
Right. So just the fact that they were growing up during this.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's already like setting the tone for me as I was looking up the information. I was like, okay, this is ugly. So the silent generation is also sometimes referred to as the builder generation. I did know that about them because of their role in building the United States economy after the Great Depression. Yeah, so they had to basically rebuild everything.
And that's why, and I think it's awesome because I didn't know, but that's why they said they became a global superpower.
Right. And it really wasn't. It wasn't like there was nothing left, but it pretty much nothing. I mean, this was a 10-year depression. That's pretty steep. Yeah, that's pretty long. So
Okay.
let's see. Are we up to the part where you're reading for us yet?
I am.
Are we?
Yep.
Okay, I got us there.
All right. A family retail article states the birth years of the silent generation. As with all generations, the birth years given for the silent generation vary, depending on who creates the evaluation or defines the term. An often used range, however, is 1928 to 1945. These years span from the beginning of the Great Depression to the end of World War II. People born during this time are also sometimes called radio babies or traditionalists. The term silent generation mainly refers to people living in the U.S., but in some other parts of the world, war and economic trouble led to similar characteristics and behaviors in people born during this time.
Yeah, so they collect, of course, most of the data from the United States, but throughout they also collect data worldwide. So yeah, just at some point in time, maybe they weren't associating other countries like with this stuff, and then due to behavioral studies, they're like, oh, these people are acting like people are part of the silent generation.
That's why it changes so much because it's not just the U.S.
Yeah, so radio babies are traditionalists, right? So during this time, this was a form of entertainment.
That's what I was gonna ask. What does that term mean?
Yeah, so
Radio
during
babies.
Christmas at church, remember when the four of us went through, we each did like a Christmas movie and kind of tied it into a sermon,
Yeah.
and I did a Christmas story. So remember when Ralph is gathered around the radio and he's trying to find out like that mystery. He's doing like this. He has a book and it's like this little mystery thing that comes on every week, and he listens to it. That was that was a form of entertainment for them. So gathering around the radio, just the way families today would gather around the television.
Wow.
Yeah, so for them it was the radio. Yeah, and anytime I see movies like that, I always think it's cool.
It is. It's just awesome to see something so well. We can't necessarily relate to it, but something so I guess that's older and modern, something that's no longer here anymore because we have this technology and all this stuff that's so amazing and so out there that we really don't even do the gathering.
Yeah, I feel like it definitely
Sorry.
it definitely helps people hold on to their imagination longer. Just because of the fact that, there was no picture there. You know what I mean? So just kind of looking far out and having to picture everything. I just feel like this generation, like they got a chance to hold on to their imaginations a lot longer than probably some of the later generations.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, so who are the silent generation, right? So the oldest members of this generation, they were born at the beginning of the Great Depression. So they would be the oldest. So they would have been very aware, of what was going on during that time. And even if they were at an age where maybe it was kind of like, things look crazy, but I don't really know what it is, they probably still were able to grasp some understanding that, things are not the greatest right now.
Of course, yeah.
It says they were children during World War II. So I'm like, wow, that was probably crazy.
Traumatizing.
And came of age during the 1950s, right, and 60s. So and I thought a very interesting point was when they pointed out that this generation is significantly smaller than their predecessors. So like they're smaller than the greatest generation, and then they're smaller than the generation of baby boomers.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So they're small.
And it makes sense. Like when I first looked at that information, I had already, known about the Great Depression, World War II. In a little bit, we're going to get into the Dust Bowl. I'll have you explain that. So it's things like that where it's kind of like by the time I got to the point of where they're growing up and that they're smaller than their predecessors or the generations that are after them, and I think it's one before the silent, which is the greatest generation. Yeah, they said they were bigger than them too. Yeah, I read that part. So it just made sense to me because there was like so much going on during their time that I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. A total feeling of instability, a cloud of instability was basically constantly over their lives. Like that's just the way that I see that with all of that different, with all of that different stuff going on. It's just kind of like, should we do this? I don't think the times are good to do this. Yeah. Should we? Yeah. Nah, I don't think we should. Like, so I could just feel like it just a whole bunch of like unsurety and just like not like the economy's so up and down, nothing's really stable. Yeah. So a lot of them were like, yeah, let's just chill out on the whole family thing, right? Mm-hmm. So here it says many scholars believe that the silent generation's low birth rate was due to the uncertainty and difficult conditions of the time, which meant that fewer people felt secure in starting families and raising children. The silent generation, as well as the greatest generation, were the parents of the baby boomers.
Oh wow.
Right. So, which is very interesting, and it says a lot about that next generation of parents and how they parented. But some things were different.
Yeah, they were.
Some things were different. So I thought right here was pretty interesting. Unlike the previous generation who had fought for changing the system, the silent generation were about working within the system. They did this by keeping their heads down and working hard, thus earning themselves the silent label. Their attitudes lean towards not being risk takers and playing it safe. So nothing wrong with playing it safe, right?
Yeah.
But it's so funny to see. Let's see, we got silent, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, right?
Yeah.
So it's so crazy to see, like 4 generations later, you got a generation of people, mainly millennials and Gen Z, where they're just like fighting the system.
Yeah.
Like it's just like, and it's an all out fight. Like it's a war on the system, basically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I know this is probably very interesting for them to watch and to see, and I could just see some of them with back in my day, like you know what I mean, and it's understandable. It's different times at this point. It's a different generation, so it just calls for different times, different people. Things have changed, and I know with millennials and with Gen Z, me being a part of the millennial generation, it's just kind of like, it's not like our generation doesn't have respect for systems, right? Because I can get with that. Like, I think systems should be put in place, right? And that's also coming from someone that did a couple years in the Marine Corps. You know what I mean? So it's like, I have no problem with systems being put in place, chain of commands, like hierarchy. I'm like, that's fine, but it's the crookedness of the system where we're kind of like, yeah, we're not letting that fly.
And we don't. Unlike, I feel like, so I don't know if you agree with this or not, but baby boomers, what is your perspective of them? Do you feel like they're the same way or they're not so much? Because I think they'll put up with a lot more. At least for a little longer. Yeah.
That's a good question, because we spoke about them previously, like baby boomers. They're the generation that very hardly equates their value to their work. And like and what they do, like, makes them feel more valuable. Right. So we know that this generation, that's like a hard line for them. So I would say that there would definitely be some traits from their parents that would be lingering in there. In a sense where it's kind of like, yeah, if I'm a baby boomer and I don't like something, I may speak up. And I think this may just be me, but I think this is also based upon how many other generations they're working with.
Yeah.
Right?
Makes sense, yeah.
So if they're working in a place where their workspace is predominantly boomers, probably not going to be a lot of speaking up.
Yeah.
Like, probably not, I'll even go as far as to say, and they nickname Gen X as the MTV generation, but I'll even go as far as to say, like, depending on how old those Gen Xers are, you still might not hear too much complaining, right? But Gen Xers, they are definitely, like Lecrae said it, the gatekeepers. That's just that generation. They're very what word did I use for them? Skeptical. Like they're the if not the most, one of the most skeptical generations. Right? So you can't just feed them anything.
No.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, you can't just tell them, like, oh, we're changing this policy, and now, like, you only have 1 day off of work and 5 days of vacation a year. Like, the Gen Xers is probably gonna be like, excuse me, sir, or ma'am. You know what I mean? Like, the baby boomer might just be like, man, like, I'm gonna get no sleep, but they might not
Yeah.
say anything. The millennial will be like, I quit.
Yep.
Like that'll pretty much,
Absolutely.
that's pretty much how that's gonna work out. So yeah, but it's not like there's nothing to be said about, them playing their roles.
Yeah.
They're going to work. Like I hear many people say, I come to work, they pay me to come to work and work.
Yeah.
Right? And honestly, sometimes with millennials and Gen Z, it's like we can be bad examples of that in the workplace.
Yeah.
Just because like this is not my full-time job and I'm still full-fledged in the workplace and I see it all the time, it just cracks me up. Like it just cracks me up because it's just, especially the managers that try to deal with all generations the same. I'm like, you clearly don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, no.
Because if you think you could talk to a Gen Zer if you think you can talk to a Gen Zer and a millennial the same way you can talk to like a baby boomer, it's just not.
Wrong.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're a little bit more belligerent. Fortunately, so big things that happen in their life. So the whole McCarthyism thing is just crazy. This is surrounded around this whole Red Scare, Senator McCarthy. I'm so mad right now. I can't remember where he's out of, like what state.
Okay.
I don't remember what state it is. I can't remember if it's like Colorado or I don't think it's Tennessee, but okay, I see you looking it up, so you can let me know. But McCarthyism, like when this thing really was in full blown, like it was kind of like Wisconsin. Okay, I knew it was somewhere out that way, but let's see what it has to say about it right here. So the political practice of publicizing accusations of disloyalty or subversion. But look at this, with insufficient regard to evidence. So it's like, yeah, we're not coming hard with no full hardcore evidence that could convict someone. It's just like we're lollygagging with it.
Wow.
And the use of methods of investigation and accusations regarded as unfair in order to suppress opposition. So I mean, they were just looking for, things like saying that there were like a whole bunch of communists, like within like the White House and within the Senate, and it was like he was causing a lot of trouble, and it really took a toll on this generation from the perspective of like politics, what was going on with the war. And it really just, what it says is that it caused a lot of people in that generation to lose a lot of faith in the government.
Oh, wow.
Like it caused a lot. So this whole Red Scare thing, February 1950, when he claimed to possess a list of 205 card-carrying communists, and that's Senator McCarthy, employed in the U.S. Department of State. So he's saying that he has 205 card-carrying communists that are employed within the U.S. Department of State. From that moment, Senator McCarthy becomes a tireless crusader against communism in the early 1950s, in a period that has been commonly referred to as the Red Scare. So he was literally the one that caused all of this by saying like there's all these different type of communists that are within the White House and within the Senate, and he was like, leading a crusade to like find these people. And it was just a disaster, like with the war going on, and then the Great Depression, like right there, it really caused this generation to just be like, yeah, the government is the last thing we're going to trust.
That's
Like the last thing. And it's like, I do know a couple of people in the silent generation, mainly that have retired from my job, but like they would never watch like news. Like they wouldn't watch like CNN or like NBC. They would always go like on YouTube and find like a local news place to watch, because they just, the big broadcasting networks, they were like, no, don't watch those, don't trust that. So this was a big thing for them. Some of the things that happened, like the Dust Bowl. So what went on with that really quickly?
So the Dust Bowl lasted about 6 years. It covered about 5 states. And it was basically like an economic depression. It coupled with an extended drought. It had high temperatures, winds, gusts, poor aggravated practices that resulted with wind erosion,
Mm-hmm.
and it killed a lot of people, messed up a lot of stuff. It even resulted in, which I thought was crazy and reminded me of the Bible, clouds of grasshoppers and stuff
Mm-hmm.
everywhere that they had to have. And it was so bad that they had to have people come and, like, literally from, like, the military and stuff come and, like, I wouldn't say exterminate because it's definitely bigger than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, to get rid of them. It
Yeah.
was crazy.
That's on some Exodus stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, so the Dust Bowl, one thing that happened, that was terrible. We talked about it, the Great Depression. That's 10 years of misery,
Yep.
right? And then World War II. Like, and these are like major events. So remember, we went over some major events with baby boomers. And even like talking about millennials, we'll talk about 9/11 and things like that. But it's like, what?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like baby boomers had, and we went through like their, I think it was 15-year span, and it was already like yikes. You know, with just so many iconic people dying, and then so
Yeah.
many things happening that changed the trajectory of America forever. You know, so or at least as we know it right now. So I mean, like, but when we look at like some of the things that happened with the silent generation and even the generation before them, the greatest generation, it's like, dude, yikes.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, this is like nothing compared to some of the stuff that we saw
No,
and
it's
like
not.
what we went through and even the generations before us. So now we're getting, what were you gonna say, babe?
I was just gonna say a lot of these things. Like I don't remember how long World War II lasted. Sorry, but the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, it's like it lasted such a longevity of time. You have 10 years and then 6 years, and they didn't get a break because it's also right around the same time.
Right.
Some things collided.
Yeah, it was it's pretty steep for this generation. Like when I looked into it, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense for the people I know in this age bracket.
Yeah. It does.
So we're at their parenting style, right?
Yeah.
The silent generation was known for working within the system rather than fighting the system. We talked about that. They parented quietly and without doing anything that called attention to them. They kept their heads down and did what they had to do. They are known for becoming parents at the youngest ages of all the generations, which I thought was pretty cool, actually. So they married and gave birth as young adults. They were also the generation that popularized divorce, and there were many divorces seen in this generation. Many of the silents raised their children to be seen and not heard. I thought that was a very interesting point.
Yeah, that's why I would think this.
Right. So, and that explains what we just talked about, where if you're in a workplace and you ask me like, so what do you think the boomers would be like, you know, and I'm talking about the policy example, it's like to be seen and not heard. This explains why performance at work is very important to the boomer generation. Extremely important. That's what I mean. Like they rather perform and show it through their numbers, which isn't a horrible thing, right? But this is not like then say anything. This is even like voice things.
Yeah.
You know, like maybe issues within the workplace. You know, maybe things that they see going on that they know systemically is wrong.
Yeah.
But it's like if you think about their parents, work within the system, do what you got to do, keep your head down, don't take any risks, don't make any noise, right? So it's like you're gonna instill that in your children, you know, and that's why with boomers, extremely hard work ethic makes sense because of their parents are the silents, right? But also there are some things where it's like, hey, I equate my value to my job, like to what I do for work. I put so much pride in that it's like we can't mess with that.
Yeah.
And now with us looking at their parents, it's like, yeah, that makes sense.
It really does.
Their parents were not about making noise within the system. So you know at work, like heaven forbid I say, those workplaces were very silent, like pun intended. Like it was, you could probably hear a pin drop in those places of work.
That's crazy.
Meaning like it's maybe casual conversations going on. Sure, they're people, right? But it's like, I think gossip was probably at an all-time low.
And what about like, so it would be dead silent even when people were being done wrong within the company, of course, as well.
You could forget it then.
No,
like it's like there is no like HR I'll never go there. You know, and it's like you still see some of that today. But if anything, at that point, it was like a taboo. You know, like I've even heard like guys who I work with tell me about their older like uncles and men in their family that they were raised by, and they're telling me about how they dealt with situations at work, and they're around this age at this point in their life now, the guys I work with, and they're like, dude, like my grandfather told me that he just told a guy like, I'll go out back and I will beat the hell out of you. Like he literally said, he was like, that's how they handle things. It was not like I'm going to go make an HR complaint. It was like, if you do that again, if you embarrass me, I will beat the crap out of you. Wow. Like it, and I'm like, okay, that's how it was handled. But something, is something twisted is going to come along with everybody being so silent, right? Yeah. Things are going to get handled horribly. Mm-hmm. So it's like you come to work the next day with a black eye, and it's like, hey man, what happened? Oh, I ran into the door.
Yeah.
Like that's, you know what I mean? Like we don't talk about that. Yeah. We're the silent generation. Bad. So, but I did think this was interesting. Yeah, trauma, definitely. Mm-hmm. A big difference between boomers as parents and the silents. So their demographic could not be more different from the silent generation who raised them. And that shows in their parenting styles. This generation actually cared about the perspective of how kids felt growing up. So I thought that was a really good point, because I even remember Tim Ross mentioning this on his podcast at one point, saying like, a child stays in a child's place. Keep your mouth closed. Don't be an adult's business. So some of that comes from their parents, because I've even heard my mother say that, and people who like my mother's grandmother, of course, which would be in that generation. But it's like some of that definitely did trickle down. To where you even hear certain parents today say things like that, right? Yeah. But boomers really started to open that up in a sense where it's like the silent generation was making their children be silent, whereas the boomers, as they got older, they didn't like that. They realized like, yeah, I couldn't say this. And my mom says it all of the time. I wasn't allowed to say this. Yeah. If I said that, my grandmother would do this. My uncle would do that, So when she was parenting us, and that's the one word I use for my mom all the time, transparent. Yeah. Like she always talked to us. She always let us express how we felt. Mm-hmm. She always wanted to understand it and actually hear it. Mm-hmm. And I know now, like a lot of that, and my mentor at work, who's a boomer, he's like that with his daughter. So I know a lot of that comes from like, yeah, when we were growing up, we weren't allowed to do that. But I want something better for my children. Yeah, like I don't want my children to be like that, because what they are realizing is that by the time I became an adult, that all that silence affected me like this. Yeah. Because now they're in their 50s and 60s and they're like, oh yeah, so that's not a good idea. I need my child to tell me how they feel, and I need to tell them to not always be silent. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, guys, we're wrapping this up. I know that was a fast ep, but I got a therapy session. I ain't scared to say it. I love therapy. I've been in therapy a couple years now. Some of y'all need some therapy. But either way, we love you guys. Stay tuned for the next episode. I am going to touch on the greatest generation because they're the greatest, right? So we gotta talk about the silenced parents. So let's see what that's about. You guys stay tuned. We love you guys. See you next time. Peace.